Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. I'm an editor at the OECD, and today we're talking about artificial intelligence in education, specifically about whether artificial intelligence can make student learning more accessible and inclusive. Obviously, there's lots of hype and concern around AI at the moment, from self-driving cars to AI in medicine, to the potential for robots to take over millions of jobs. It's in the headlines almost every day. And in the realm of education, AI learning bots and other AI technologies are touted as having the potential to revolutionize learning in the classroom. According to one estimate, AI in education will be worth some $6 billion this year alone, and it's expected to be worth a lot more in the years to come. So it is a big business, but will AI create learning experiences that are more accessible and inclusive? Well, today I'm glad to say I'm joined by a fantastic panel of guests who are going to explore that very question. Joining us on the panel today, Wayne Holmes, Associate Professor at University College London; Kevin Johnston, a Programme Specialist at the US Department of Education; Emil Kroger, Senior Software Engineer from United Robotics Group. And I see he's got a robotic friend with him as well. Hello to the robots. I'm sure we'll find out more about him or her later on. And Nicole Rummel, Research Professor at the Centre for Advanced Internet Studies. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Before we get started, I want to let everyone watching and listening at home or in the office to know that you can take part in the conversation as well. Please do send in your questions via the chat function at the bottom of your feed. Please include your name and where you're from, and you can ask a general question to everyone on the panel or direct them to a specific person. So please do get involved. Now though, let's kick things off. Wayne Holmes from University College London. Let's start with you. As I said before, there's a lot of hype about artificial intelligence. Many people have concerns about it as well, such as AI tools being used to cheat in lessons, for example. But supporters say there are lots of advantages. What do you think about AI in the classroom, particularly in terms of equity and inclusion?
Thank you, Duncan, for the question, and thank you to OECD for inviting me to join this panel today. To answer your question, I kind of have to be upfront that I'm a bit skeptical about the claims. It's not just that can a particular tool be implemented safely in a classroom. My question is, should we be even attempting to implement that tool in the classroom in the first place? So we need to step back. In terms of equity and inclusion, a huge amount has been written about this. The problem is that there's very, very little evidence from the research community that's independent, that's at scale, that suggests that any of these things can actually happen. Now, if we're talking about, can the tools be used in a classroom in the West, in the developed country, then that is happening increasingly. But let's be clear, when we talk about AI, we're not just talking about the current crop of exciting generative AI like ChatGPT. The AI in education research community has been around for 45 years. In a recent paper, we identify more than 20 different types of AI tools that could be used in education. And generative AI is just one of those. But I think two things I'll say and then I'll stop is firstly, when we talk about AI, it's as if we're talking about a technology that's somehow in charge of itself. But actually, AI is only a technology that represents a huge industry of people, from the developers and the researchers to the funders, the policymakers. So can AI add to equity and inclusion? Answer, well, it really depends on that ecosystem of people, whether or not the choices that are made are the right kind of choices to do that. One of the classic examples of where a given where these tools are supposed to support equity and inclusion is that, that fabled school in a developing country in the rural area. Now, we know that there are many, many, many schools like that around the world, and we know that the children in those schools do not receive the quality education they have human right to. And there's been lots of suggestions that we could put AI tools in those kind of settings and we'd solve the problem. But I really don't think that's the case. What happens is, often there's not the infrastructure, there's not the electricity, there's not the internet. And even if we do have those, typically there's not the engineer who can fix the kit when it goes wrong, which we'll do very, very quickly. And while we might help, the current cohort of students with this sexy AI technologies, actually, it really doesn't help the problem. The real problem is the lack of qualified and supported teachers. And so that's where we should be putting our emphasis. If we're genuinely interested in supporting equity and inclusion, then let's look at how we support, how we train, how we fund more teachers around the world. And I just don't buy that AI is going to solve that problem.
Thank you so much for that opening answer there, Wayne. Wayne, clearly not a fan of AI, or in all areas anyway. Let's get a reaction to that opinion from Kevin Johnston from the US Education Department, because in the US, certainly a number of artificial intelligence companies are trying out some of their technologies in the classroom at this very moment in time. Kevin Johnston, what's the US government position on this? Is the use of AI in the classroom something you're encouraging or not?
Well, I think we're taking a very use case kind of centered approach, as I think is, advisable here. Certainly, we don't think every use case that could come to mind is worth exploring. And so when we put out our guidance in May of 2023, we said, look, first and foremost, humans in the loop whenever you're using an AI system. And I know that there's a lot of there has since kind of proliferated, what does that mean? And people have had different things. I think we mean something like co-pilot, partnership, that it serves as this kind of thought partner for teachers and educators, but everything should still revolve around the educator and their decision making. But I think most important, or in companionship with that, we said only use it where there is a strong alignment with your educational vision for how you want students to be learning and interacting in your school. So there is a distinct potential to take this and use it where you have kids sitting at desks with headphones on, isolated from their peers. And we're saying, I don't know very many schools that have that educational vision. They much more want their students to be interacting, to be involved in authentic problem solving. And there are ways in which AI can make inroads there. So the last kind of cornerstone of our guidance was design using modern learning principles. And at the heart of modern learning principles is that learning is a socially connected activity. And so these technologies, this set of technologies, as Wayne rightly points out, is not a technology, but a cluster of technologies. But one thing they all have in common is they tend to be quite dynamic, emergent even. And so use those in ways that support that social connectedness, that support students learning together, and that's always centered around a qualified, connected, informed educator that's helping to make decisions.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Let's bring in Emil Kroger from the United Robotics Group. I want to get your position on this because you're actively involved in developing robots and other technology. Obviously, there's a robot with you there. Tell us a bit about what you're working on and how you think it will impact inclusivity in education.
So it's interesting between robots and AI because the two are often put together. For example, in a lot of articles, like even your slide, if you're talking about AI, people put a picture of a robot. In practice, we've been working with those robots for a long time without any very deep AI principles. It's often a good way to bring students in the physical world to work on problems that are not on a screen or in abstract, but that are physical, which is nice for, I think, creating interest among students that might not be naturally interested in those kind of topics. So for me, that is one aspect to push towards more accessibility to students who are not generally interested in extremely academic things. And we get approached by organizations trying to promote things, and they want a robot at least to bring students interest, and students do have a lot of interest even from those backgrounds. And more recently, we are getting into AI, because whether or not, regardless of AI's role in education, AI is useful in general, and I use it every day in my daily work. So I think it's useful for students to learn about it, even if it's not necessarily used to teach them. It's a topic worth learning about. So we're working with teachers to help develop new solutions on our robot. For example, where they can create dialogues they can create a robot that can dialogue with people, both through some traditional hard-coded programming way, or by linking it to large language models and have an AI-driven robot. So, and putting it in the real world. And this can create some really interesting ways for students to explore on their own how to use AI. And of course, teachers can try to integrate this into their classroom. So we're giving toolkits to the teachers, and it's up to the teachers to see how they will fit this into their learning experience.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let's bring in Nicole Rummel from the Center for Advanced Internet Studies, because we've had a variety of different viewpoints there. And I wonder what you think, how big an impact AI is going to have on education. Is the potential impact being exaggerated, or are we talking about a potential revolution in schools that will improve learning for students?
Well, thank you, Duncan. Thanks for inviting me and giving me the floor now. I think a lot is already on the table, and what has become clear already on the panel is that there are a lot of questions, and we have to be careful in what exactly we're talking about. So to answer your question briefly first, yes, there's a potential. It's like when electricity was invented, but you wouldn't say electricity automatically would change education in and by itself. It could change education because you need to learn about it, like Emil was pointing out. It could change education because you can learn at different times of the day, in the night, for instance, because you can switch on the light. Same is true for AI. You could be supported in a self-regulated manner to learn outside of school, for instance. But then you really need to, I think we really have to be sure we're working together and asking the right questions. Who are we supporting for what aims? Are we supporting the learners? Do we support them in using AI tools for their individual learning? Like a lot of students in Germany now use ChatGPT for their homework. Or are we giving them AI tools or software that is purposefully designed with educational and pedagogical background to support certain learning content, like math, for instance, in a tutoring system? Or are we teaching them about AI? So that's one question for the learning, but then you can also look at the teaching. Maybe AI, and that's actually what I think is really important here. We heard a lot about the human in the loop, and I think AI underscores the importance of teacher rather than reducing it, for instance, because I think AI and the computational capabilities that we have in using AI techniques in making data accessible and in helping to see things that you cannot see in a classroom out of 30 students, that may well be where more revolution lies, rather than sort of putting away the teachers and helping the students. So, but looking there again carefully, how can we use AI in the surface of helping teachers be better teachers and having sort of this extra layer there? And another distinction, sorry for making up so many distinctions, is like, what kind of AI are we talking about? I mean, there's classic AI, there's sort of ways of, like I mentioned, tutoring systems, of giving individualized, personalized support based on the way you problem solve or you work in an environment. But there's also generative AI, where you have a lot of computational power and then statistical, basically, comparison of search results that are then, for instance, given to students. So bottom line, I think there's a lot of potential. I think the human in the loop is a really, like the empowering of teachers is a really important way to look at it. And we got to be careful what we're talking about and not talk about AI as if it was an entity somewhere out there that we can kind of hire for us.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll do my best not to refer to as AI in an overall term, but I may struggle at times during this webinar. Wayne Holmes from UCL, let's bring you back in. I wonder on your reflections on what some of the other panelists have said And also in terms of accessibility, you obviously raised some skepticism before about the potential for AI to benefit schools and the classroom. Do you think that AI technologies can potentially benefit in terms of accessibility to learning?
I think the problem that we have had is that the ambition of the research community over the 45 years has been to principally to develop tools that can replicate human teaching. And while I, am impressed and value most of that work, I think we need to change that trajectory. So instead of developing tools that pretend to do what teachers do, those tools that do exist have their place, homework perhaps, but I do find it quite frightening. And I have seen many schools where there are 30 students, 30 computers, and the children ignoring each other and ignoring the teacher. They're just focusing on their computer in front of you. So the change in trajectory, if we really want to support our students, I think we need to think about how we can use these amazing technologies to enable teachers, not to try to replace what teachers do. And I think that this, two of my colleagues have already mentioned the phrase human in the loop, and I completely appreciate the ambition of that, but I think it's around the wrong way. I think the human should be the center, this should be the thing, this should be the focus. And that occasionally, when appropriate, we allow computers and AI technologies to come into the loop, not thinking that they somehow are the strength here. The strength are the humans, the people. So I think it's really important. And colleagues also mentioned the importance of training teachers, and I cannot agree with that more strongly. Because teachers, like all of us, are just suddenly discovering this crazy world launched, generative AI over the past 15 months or so. And they're struggling with it as much as everybody. And to be able to understand it and use it effectively, to be able to use those technologies to support their students effectively, they need a lot more support and professional development, which is just, it's very thin on the ground at the moment around the world, as far as I'm aware. That's where we should be focusing. But let me be very clear. I think that AI, the technology itself, how it works, how to create it, those kind of things should be taught in schools, but also specifically to teachers. But in addition to that, and I would argue half the curriculum time when you're looking at AI, half the time, not 5 minutes at the end of a course, which is pretty traditional at the moment, but half the time should be spent on what are the impacts, potential and known, of these technologies, broadly speaking, not just in education, but on people. And if teachers are not aware of those potentials, not aware of those challenges, so for example, most teachers who are happily using generative AI are not aware of the fact that these tools only exist on the backs of some incredibly poorly paid people in places like Kenya who were underpaid for looking at some disgusting materials that these tools originally generated. And it's on the backs of those workers that now generative AI is being used in classrooms. But teachers are not aware of that. Teachers also are not aware, and not just teachers, but everybody are not aware of the fact that the way that generative AI works, it is increasingly marginalized already marginalized voices, because the way it works is it effectively just takes the average. And as a metaphor for that, I like to think of, if generative AI had been around in the 1950s, it would confidently be saying smoking is good for you, because that was the dominant view at the time. Now we know that was wrong, but just port that to today. So I think as well as looking at the technologies, we also need to look at those human impacts. And only if we do that, only if we can support teachers with that, are they in a position to then look at the technologies that are out there to make rational, supported, informed decisions about which AI tools might be appropriate for their children, their classroom, their curriculum. But if we don't have that training right in the first place, that's not going to happen.
Thanks for all that, Wayne. Let's bring in Kevin Johnson from the US Department for Education there. A lot of points made there, including about the importance of educating teachers about artificial intelligence. I'm wondering what's happening in the US regarding that. And also, if you take an AI bot, for example, who decides the curriculum? Who decides on the topics, the teaching methods, and so on when using artificial intelligence in education? Is it the tech companies that choose, or is the government involved in some way, or state or educators in states in the US who have some sort of oversight?
Yeah, so first I want to talk briefly about a report that we just issued called the National Educational Technology Plan, which is, it takes about 1.5 years to develop. We go across, we meet with hundreds of different stakeholders, we meet with companies, we meet with teachers, we meet with district leaders. And one of the core components of that report that we just issued is around what we're calling the digital design divide. And this is the divide between teachers who have a dedicated time and space to think with their colleagues about how to incorporate technology meaningfully into their instruction, and those teachers who are given little to no time and space to think about that, to learn about the impacts of the technology, to learn about its origins. And we think that there is a gap, at least in our country, between the teachers who are provided that opportunities and the teachers who are not. And we call explicitly for district leaders to close that gap. So we went back and reviewed every national technology plan, since the first one in the 1990s, and we've closed all the other gaps that we've kind of have been brought up, or made progress on all the other gaps that have been brought up. We've made very little progress on that particular gap around providing professional learning specific to teachers on this. So I absolutely agree. We're calling attention to it, and we think it's something that needs to be addressed. On the point of curriculum, I mentioned we're a weird system. We don't do curriculum. That's up to the states for us. But I think one of the things that we have seen that's quite powerful is the ability of systems to be responsive to other pieces that are loaded in parallel, right? So if you have a curriculum, the systems appear to be fairly competent at taking pieces of that and then repurposing it in another context. And so, in our case, we have standards, state standards. And we've seen examples where teachers say, I want, my lesson plan just got blown up because of the assembly ran over or whatever. Can you create a 15-minute activity that's aligned to this state standard that will help my students? And they use that to quickly come up with a lesson plan. Of course, they edit on top, they do, some changes, but it helps them to make adjustments on the fly. It helps them to think, quickly, to integrate other things. This is what the students have already learned, or this is what we're already talking about. Can you give me something that's based on that? And so I think the ability for these systems to quickly assimilate information that's context specific and then combine it with other information, it seems to be fairly dynamic. I'm also cognizant of we are in the early days. I think one researcher I was hearing say, you'll never experience anything worse in terms of user experience than you're getting now. Okay. And so, we're in the early days, but we're already seeing promising signs of being able to provide those kinds of supports for teachers.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Let's bring Emil Kroger from United Robotics Group back in, because I'd like you to reflect on what Kevin said there about teachers and the need for them to be trained. Do you reach out to schools or teachers to support them in learning about your products? And also, in terms of accessibility, how can products such as yours help students who have specific needs? For example, if they're disabled, for example.
Thank you. So for reaching out to teachers, yes, that is definitely something we do. We both actually, I've been involved several times in training groups of teachers on how to use our technologies, because that is very important. And I do confirm what Kevin was saying, that there is definitely a gap between some teachers who do have time to spend and energy to spend on these technologies and some who just do not. So it's really going to depend on the school and on the skill level sometimes of the individual teachers. They don't always have a dedicated teachers for dealing with sort of high-tech-ish topics. And often they will run into like a lot of detailed logistics issues due to their schools, networking, etc. So this can be a big time sink. We also work with various associations that are promoting STEM or helping win curricula, and typically those would rather be the ones helping build curricula and learning material. It's going to very much depend on the country. France, Germany, the US all have different standards. I wanted to react maybe, sorry, quickly on something Wayne was saying earlier on the AI that would tell you that smoking was okay. Interesting, because I've been chatting with other people integrating ChatGPT and text like that in their solution, and I have the advantage of being a more education use case. So we will deliberately show how it can get things wrong. For example, I had a long argument about my robot telling that it did not have a physical body, or a robot with wheels telling it could go up and down stairs, and it would insist that actually it had these sensors. I mean, there's no way. But that was it was very interesting. We actually will design some examples in curricula that show the AI getting things wrong, because it's important for the students and the teachers to see this happening and see actually the limits of the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emil. Let's go to Nicole Rummel again from the Center for Advanced Internet Studies. And thank you to everyone who has been sending in their questions. Nicole, I want to give one of them to you. It's from Martin Henry, who writes in saying, support for teachers who are human in the loop is crucial here. How do we construct meaningful PLD programs that enable teachers to make sound pedagogical choices around technology, of which AI is the latest bright, shiny thing?
Yeah, that is, I mean, as Wayne was already saying, I think that is the question. I am actually at the KAIS, where I am, the Center for Advanced Internet Studies. We are now part of a task force that was initiated by our state government, because like in the US, it's also the states that are responsible for education. And it's actually a mixture of scientists, of researchers in this area, practitioners, so school principals, but also teachers, policymakers, and politicians. And we're interested in finding ways not only to work towards the responsible integration of AI into the educational processes, but also which has turned out to be maybe even more important, what is the right way and how can we best design for professional development? And we were just discussing about this morning. And Wayne, I was also wondering what you think about it, because well, A, what is a good process in trying to do that? And B, what should be the contents? And I think that from my experience in our task force at the North Rhine-Westphalia level, I think that we do desperately need a conversation between these different stakeholder groups. It cannot be the people who usually design for PD, but you have to have the people like Emil, for instance, the companies, the edtech companies as well that are developing. You need to have research in there, researchers in there. And then the question is, what do teachers need the most? I mean, Wayne, you already alluded to some aspects. And I think that there's, on the one hand, this need to find ways, like, for instance, maybe with a robot that is programmable to learn about AI, how it works, to make experiences, but then also to find ways to use tools, not like a robot, but tools like tutoring software, or even ChatGPT or other tech generative AI for learning in the subject areas, in math, in giving feedback, in languages. And so far, and I think, Kevin, I heard you say the same, in Germany, it's a lot of individual initiatives by schools, by very engaged teachers who are putting out their materials for others to use, who are finding clever ways of integrating it in their classroom teaching. But I think here, we first need also pedagogical models that we can then transform into professional development. So I'm thinking that we're really challenged to go in two directions here, in this sort of, how can we teach about AI? How can we make experiences for teachers in their education, but also for learners in the schools? And how can we help teachers use it in good ways? I'm also thinking here about, for instance, in tutoring systems, intelligent tutoring systems. At a certain point, it was clear that not every teacher wants to use a tutoring system the way it's like from the shelf. but they do not have the programming skills to develop them. So cognitive tutor authoring tools were being developed that can make it possible for every person or every teacher to develop their own. So I'm wondering what the others think here.
Yeah, thank you for all those points, Nicole. And you raised a number of questions there, and most of them directed at Wayne. So Wayne Holmes from UCL, you've got about a dozen questions to answer. You've got about a minute and a half to do it. Go for it.
But the first thing I wanted to say, I think I had a conversation with a colleague of Kevin's just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the point I made to him is that, I do not criticize the work that those teams are doing, because they're doing good stuff. But the problem I have is they rarely have critical voices in the room. So they will have representatives of the companies, and they rarely have representatives of the teacher unions, for example. And so that we need to address, but definitely we need more critical voices in the room. I think with some of the other points that Nicole was making, it's so important that we can work with our teachers to enable them to make those rational and informed decisions. The problem is that, I've been involved in a couple of surveys recently of teachers across something like 31 countries. There it was very clear that most of those teachers did not really understand what AI is, how it works, its potential, its challenges. And for them, you refer to it as a shiny new thing, or potentially a shiny new thing. The other way I like to think of this is it's back to the US Wild West, where the guys in their wagons would go around selling the proverbial snake oil. And so there's hundreds of organizations out there in any country that are trying to sell their tools into the education sphere. But the problem is we really don't know how effective they will be. So there's been, over the history of the AI in education research, thousands of studies, but there's been very, very few studies that are independent, that are at scale, and that check not just does it do what it says on the tin, but also is it safe? And also, is its broader impact on the classroom, the ecosystem, the relationships between teachers and students, are we demonstrating that as well? So before my minute and a half finishes, which I'm sure it did at least half a minute ago, I'm just going to refer to some work we're doing at the Council of Europe. 46 member states have agreed that the Council should now develop a legal instrument to regulate the use of AI in educational settings. So it's a long process, but I think it's an important one. In and of itself, it won't solve things, but hopefully it gives us a grounding. And the metaphor I use is like the medical world. We wouldn't put a drug into somebody's arm or mouth until we know it's gone through those efficacy and safety trials. Now, even with that, we still have problems. But my question is, when we're talking about children's developing brains, why on earth are we prepared to use technologies like medicines without really good understanding of the safety, the efficacy, and the positive impact of those tools on the classroom? That's where we should.
Kevin Johnston, let's get your reaction to the points made by Wayne. Why should schools and teachers be using these technologies if there isn't, as what Wayne Holmes described as enough testing?
Well, I think we have an independent research arm from the department. That's the Institute for Education Sciences. I'll put a link to a recent set of awards they made that folks might find interesting, that they're all kind of AI specific. And I think they would say, and we would say, there needs to be testing of these products for efficacy. And then, I think increasingly, we're seeing calls for testing on safety and bias and transparency and accountability and all those kinds of things as well. And so I think that's absolutely the right way to head. On that piece that I put in I wanted to provide an example of one of the changes that was made for that particular competition. This isn't true of all competitions that we're running, but on that particular competition, we said, or the Institute said, if you don't have a partnership that has a researcher, a product developer, and representatives from a state or local education agency, then you're not like that's the bounds of the competition. Table stakes is you come in with the right kind of partnership and you tell us how this partnership is going to make sure that you have, you know, sufficiently robust perspectives at the table. Because I think one of the things that's very important is to think about not just that the types of interactions can change with AI, but the pace of development can change. And so we're looking not at, oh, we like, you know, this competition, oh, we promise we'll get the folks on board as we go along, but it's being very intentional from the outset and thinking that we have the right folks together as you get started, because you can move really fast in the wrong direction if you don't have those people together from the beginning.
You're muted.
Forgive me, my microphone was muted. Thank you for that, Kevin. Nicole Rummel, I see that your hand is raised. You'd like to come back on that point of Kevin's. Over to you.
Well, actually, to the point of both of Wayne and Kevin, because I wanted to challenge you here a little bit, because I've been making similar arguments like you've been making, but then I get the response that, well, what do teachers do who are like in the classroom faced with their students using AI for learning, not just in their regular lives, but for learning? So how can we help there? So it's one thing to have like a process for developing and sort of validating AI tools that are like dedicated and developed in a dedicated manner for learning, for helping learning and teaching. But what do we do about the fact that students are simply sort of, it's pushing into the classrooms because students are simply using it? So how do we respond to that?
Okay, well, we'll come to that in a moment, because I think part of this is about when we're saying how is the technology going to be used, we have someone with us who has a robot anyway, which is planned to be used with children. So I wondered, Emil Kroger, if you don't mind, can you tell us or demonstrate even with your robot, show us a bit about what it can do?
I don't have an education program running here. Also, I mean,
well, what can it do? You don't have to show us then.
Oh,
what can
yes,
it do?
it can do a lot of different things, because basically it's made more as an open platform that teachers can use on their own. So we're not coming with a pre-built solution for a specific use case, though other people, some of our partners have developed, for example, language teaching with a robot, where the robot is a kind of language tutor, so you can practice spoken interaction. There's more common some programming lessons, but it's very multidisciplinary, robotics in general. Basically, anytime a technology exists, once you integrate into the physical world, it starts getting called robotics. But one thing we like a lot is creating interactions with the robot, dialogue, which is kind of a fun and engaging way of doing things with the robot, but also having the robot interact with the physical world, grasp things. I mean, the robot can perceive things, it has cameras, it can talk. So it's like a general toolkit for discovering all kinds of ways of interacting with the world and analyzing them. And I think in terms of the multidisciplinary manner, really, the multidisciplinary aspect really makes it easier to also involve students with different kinds of skills and different kinds of interests. It's not only about programming, it's really like script writing, creating a dialogue, designing a character. So it can be a very creative aspect as well. And like sound design, animations, dancing.
Okay.
Basically, you name it, we can have an example of or a demo of the robot doing that kind of thing, and this robot and others.
Okay, so you name it and it can do it. So let me come back to Wayne on that point then, because I mean, look, this sounds fantastic. It could be supportive of student learning in so many different ways, and if it can support personalized learning to adjust to people's needs, to their abilities, to their background, what's wrong with that?
Is that a question for me or for
Wayne?
Oh, sorry.
We can identify hundreds of interesting test cases where these tools, AI tools, but also robots, have been used in classroom settings, and they get interesting outputs. I'm not disputing that. And, you know, I remember at the very beginning, I didn't want to give the impression that I hate artificial intelligence. I think it's fascinating, and I think there is huge potential. My problem is not with that. My problem is the ways in which it's being implemented today. And you picked up on the word personalized there. Personally, I think that's one of the biggest myths that we have in the use of AI in education. And I think it's problematic for several reasons. I think firstly, it's problematic because it assumes that teachers, human teachers, do not personalize, and they do on a moment by moment, minute by minute basis. They always have done, and good teachers will always do that. Secondly, the whole notion of personalization, this reification of the individual, with respect, it comes from Silicon Valley, or it's re-emerged from Silicon Valley, and actually it undermines the collaborative and social aspects of teaching and learning. Thirdly, you know, the claims for these tools offering personalized learning, and also, I dare add, saving teacher time, they've been around since the 1930s, 40s, 50s with B.F. Skinner and his original work in this kind of space with his teaching machine. So, you know, he was wrong then, and most of the tools that have claimed the same since have been wrong since, and I'm just not convinced that AI does it today, or the tools embedding AI does it today. And I think, you know, the real key thing is even if the tools can do it, and I've yet to see good evidence that they really can, what they tend to do is they personalize pathways, but they take everybody along different paths to the same output, the same destination. So that's not very personalized in my book. So, you know, not only am I not convinced these tools do it, I'm not convinced that it's actually the way forward in education. I think it's as I say, it's a Silicon Valley inspired approach that we really don't need.
Thank you for that answer, Wayne. Let's go back to Kevin Johnston. Your reaction to what Wayne just said, but also I'm interested in are tech companies acting independently or working with governments to prioritize AI tools that support personalized learning in schools, in your opinion?
I want to quickly take Nicole's question, if I can, that she asked about what should teachers do about the pushing in of these. And we've had roundtables with over 80 educators at this point, where we've invited them in, including both of our major representatives from both of our major unions here in the States. And I think that one thing that was brought up during those on multiple occasions was the potential shortfalls around social media and the advent of social media, and not taking time to explicitly help students understand the pros and cons of various ways of using social media, and explicitly some of the safety risks that they would have been exposed to during their use of social media. And taking that as kind of a warning moment as we embark on a new, broadly available, general use technology, and putting some thought and time into what would it mean to be, because part of the problem is that landscape changed a lot from the first of social media to what we have now. And so how are we going to keep that information up to date for teachers and help them be able to have, you know, ready-made or at least broadly applicable points to make to students? And so I think that that's a challenge that lies before us, that they pointed out, that we heard directly from educators in the classroom, and some of them are taking it on in different ways, but I think needs to be an explicit part of the conversation.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I see Emil Krug has got his hand raised. Over to you, Kevin. Sorry, Emil. Your microphone's off.
Yes, when I described what the robot said, as it can do anything, you kind of interpreted that, Duncan, as it can like do the teachers for personalized learning, but actually we see it much more as the subject of learning, and it's not meant to come to replace the teacher or even bring its own teaching solution. It's more to replace almost the worksheet, the paper with the equations or whatever. It's to bring things in the real world. And this ties into a bit what Wayne was talking about, the whole social learning, because the aspect of having a physical object, instead of having students all in front of their computer with their thing, we have a physical aspect. So you can have some students working on this and some students working on that. For example, like a robot throws a ball so it can land somewhere. It becomes a much better medium for actually creating interaction between the students, which is what Wayne was talking about, the whole social learning aspect of it. So I just wanted to reply quickly on that.
Forgive me for misinterpreting it. Nicole Rummel from the Center of Advanced Studies. You've been engaged with the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia, and you've initiated a task force, I understand, called Artificial Intelligence in Education. Tell us a bit about that. Is personalized learning something you've discussed with policymakers?
Well, I think it has already come up that this is one of the sort of hopes and promises, but I think from what everybody else has already said, it is not so easy. I mean, I've been working in intelligent tutoring systems for a long time, where the hope is that you could provide sort of tailored support in ways where you have sort of a model of knowledge that the student is trying to acquire, and then you can give targeted feedback and support. And I was just reminded of that, Emil, as you were talking, because I've been doing this in the area of collaborative learning. And it's so incredibly hard, and I'm using that as an example, Duncan, here. It's so incredibly hard to build these models, to know exactly how should, for instance, an interaction look like. We've done research on peer tutoring support in tutoring systems, precisely because we wanted to move away from the intelligent tutor learns with one sort of drill and practice procedural learning with one student in math, but let's have the students be in a peer tutoring setting. And that was one of my initial points, that we need really good models or goals. Like, what are the competencies that we're trying to personalize for instance? And this is something that is a very long route if you want to do it. And I'm not convinced. I think, Wayne, I see it a little more positively than you do, because I think in a classroom with 30 students, it is good if the teacher is being freed to have individual conversations with students that really have specific needs. But it's really complicated to make models, whether it's for individual learning or for collaborative peer tutoring learning, conversations that can actually be adaptive, that can actually be personalized. And that's where, I mean, the AI comes into your robot, Emil, right? Because for starters, the robot is not AI. It can have AI inside once it reacts to data and once it can sort of have this interaction. So yeah, we are talking about that in the task force, Duncan, because it is one of the big hopes. But I think it's really high stake to be reaching.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone who is sending in comments and questions in the chat. It's very busy indeed, so thank you for getting involved, and apologies in advance. There's no way I can get through all the questions, but here's one from Lucy, who asks, what is the potential of AI to support students with different needs? We have already slightly touched on this, but if I can throw this one at Kevin Johnston from the US Department of Education. Lucy asking there, what is the potential of AI to support students who have different needs, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. And I think actually I want to, in our report, we use the term personalized learning. And I think, but we begin it with saying, look, this has taken on a bunch of different definitions, much similar to the point that Wayne made earlier about AI having a whole bunch of different definitions and a whole bunch of different applications. And so we are very clear that the kind of personalization that one seeks should be sought upfront. So like, I was a classroom teacher, and if my students wanted to spend time in their independent reading about soccer because that was their passion, or football, as it may be in some parts of the world, then like that kind of personalization was really important for me. And that's something that I had kind of early systems that would do some of the leveled reading for them, so they could still read. And I taught a lot of English language learners, and so they could still read the content they were interested in the system was making it accessible to them. And that kind of personalization, I think, is valuable. You're personalizing based on interest, right? And so the broad kind of hardline view of personalized learning is probably not all that desirable, but particular types of personalization, I think, could be desirable. And I think that one of the cases is students with different learning needs. This is something where we spend a lot of time at the federal level thinking about. From this group of educators that we've been convening, we have heard a lot about really kind of important and impactful ways. For example, we heard of a student who was autistic and had very limited verbal interactions, but through the use of generative AI was able to provide a few inputs. The system filled in with inference the rest of what the student wanted to say, and the student was able to confirm that that is in fact what they wanted to say. And so it was really augmenting the communication that was available to the student. Now, you wouldn't want it to speak for the student. I don't think that's what was happening here. The student was still involved in the process, but what was able to be expressed was greater than without the use of the technology. And so we have a whole band of work on assistive technologies. And we think that there's distinct promise from the use of AI to take assistive technology to a place that it's not been before.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Distinct promise. Nicole Rummel, do you agree with that? There's a question actually from Tibor Barath, which is linked to this, who asks, will AI support students to get more equal chances in learning, or will it increase inequality?
There was also a comment related to that by John Gallant in the chat that I read, and I wanted to react to. That's why I put up my hand, because I do think that the promise in helping students with special needs may just be the other way around. Kevin, just as a sort of thought-provoking thing here, because we found that in tutoring systems, for instance, it's fairly easy to keep students who are on a regular trajectory just practicing, telling them at the right level, and that way freeing the teacher's time to have the time to interact with the students who do have special needs. So there might be one route where you design technology in a way that it responds to special needs, as you were pointing out, but the other way could also be to help the ones who are already like self-regulated learn in meaningful ways while freeing the time to respond to and have time for those students who need more attention, personal one-on-one attention with the teacher. So that's a promise that I've always seen when we went with our technology to classrooms with our tutoring technologies.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Wayne Holmes from UCL, your hand's raised.
Yeah, there are several things that are buzzing here. I think, when we talk about the use of AI and other emerging technologies for people with specific needs, such as communication issues, this is kind of parallel to the world of education. Some of those technologies are amazing, and I applaud them immensely. And we need more effort and support for such people. But they need that support, whether they're inside a classroom or just in their daily lives. So I see that stuff as really important, but it's not exactly what the main AI in education community have really focused upon. And I worry that Nicole and I have known each other a long time, and I've not said this particular phrase, but I worry that, maybe the time's come, you point out the challenges, maybe the time's come to say, right, but we've explored this enough, we need to go in a different direction. And that's why I'm arguing that, focusing these technologies on enabling teachers to do what the teacher wishes to do, rather than taking over or claiming to take over what the teacher can do, I think is really important. And I come back also to this notion of, the tools giving teachers more time to look after other students. That's been the ambition forever, and it definitely does happen occasionally. But what we're seeing increasingly is, well, two things. One is that when they're doing this, actually, a teacher's time is not saved by these technologies, but a teacher's time is displaced. So they end up doing an awful lot of other things that they didn't have to do before because there's now a technology in place. But on the other hand, the teachers in the schools trying to do this work, a way in which we can actually help them instead of putting this shiny tech in, actually maybe we make the classrooms smaller in number of students. That would be a social way of addressing things more effectively. And one final thing I'm just going to add this one final thing is, Kevin, I really applaud the work that you and your department have done, which our department in the UK have not done, to engage with these wide numbers of people. But again, I would urge you to include more critical voices in there.
We're running low on time here, probably less than 5 minutes left. So Kevin Johnston, if you want your hands raised to react to Wayne Holmes there.
I just want to talk quickly about time saving, because I think it's a really interesting bit here. And we're hearing from teachers that there are specific tasks that this really does cut the amount of time that they would have ordinarily spent dramatically. And so like we had a teacher who teaches Japanese. She used to have to rewrite all of her things to make them accessible for her learners. And now, because it's a complicated language, she's able to do that at a moment's notice and check it, and fractions of the time that it took her. And I think in some ways we want to talk about that as time savings. We also have to remember that most teachers are spending way more time outside of their contract time working. And so we are kind of like pushing on the idea that it's not necessarily time savings, but it's contributing to the sustainability of the profession.
Thank you so much.
And so we should look for those opportunities.
We are running low on time. So to quickly bring this close to a close anyway, let's just briefly, you've got about 30 seconds each to talk about the future and imagine where we're going to be in maybe 5 to 10 years time, because AI is developing so rapidly. Emil Kroger, let's start with you, as you're one of the people at the frontier of these developments. Do you think it's going to change dramatically in the next 10 years, the way classrooms and schools function? Are they going to essentially be the same? Or are robots going to be everywhere?
I don't know if robots are going to be everywhere, but I think AI is likely to have a pretty big impact on how people learn. Whether this happens inside the classroom or outside the classroom on your own with ChatGPT, for example, is still an open question. But I think everybody needs to at least be aware of how fast things are working. For example, I advise my children, it might not be a good idea to pick a career as a graphical artist, because right now AI is getting incredible at that. Maybe that's not good advice, but people should be aware of this kind of thing. And school probably at least needs to follow what's going on.
Thank you, Emil. Nicole Rummel, what about you? AI, is it going to transform classrooms in the next 10 years?
I would really hope that we find a way to use AI to empower teachers and find a way to, or maybe put around to find a way to empower teachers to use AI in creative, good ways to help support them in their really incredibly hard job.
Thank you. Wayne Holmes, look into your crystal ball for me. I know you're not particularly a fan in many areas, but in 10 years' time, is it going to be drastically different, the classroom, due to AI?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, sweet.
Teachers using more AI, hopefully we'll have more teachers teaching both the human and technological dimensions of AI, but the classroom is going to still be the same. To change education, to change classrooms needs far more than just the new technology.
Thank you. And Kevin Johnston, the last voice here for today. Are you going to be embracing AI to such an extent in the US that classrooms are going to be transformed?
So I would say I would love to see a world where it makes it significant. I will stop well short of revolutionary or transformative language, but I would love to see it make a significant impact, a noticeable impact.
Thank you for that. And thank you to all of our panelists. If you want to learn more about many of the things we've been discussing, then please do go to the OECD website, click on the topics on education. There's loads of things to see. You can also follow us on Twitter Search for OECD Education or OECD Edu Skills. You can follow us on Twitter, find our LinkedIn account as well. Thank you to all our guests, to Wayne Holmes from University College London, Kevin Johnson from US Department of Education, Emil Kroger from United Robotics Group, and of course, last but not least, Nicole Rummel from the Centre for Advanced Internet Studies. Thanks to the production team and to all of you who are joining us today. And thank you so much for such an engaging chats in the webinar chat function box, and for all your questions as well. We'll have more webinars soon. All the best.
Thanks a lot.